You ever just feel like no matter what we do, society just sucks? And the worst people for the job always end up in charge? Well, trust me, you're not the first to feel that way. In fact, it's probably why the saying that history repeats itself is so widely known. Today we're going to break down why that repetition might exist and figure out what exactly is keeping humanity from embracing new ideas that can advance civilization even faster. Of course, there's many reasons, but for now, we're just going to focus on the psychological factors that we can actually control. Stay tuned to the end though, because you might even learn something about yourself. Now, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, history is repeating itself. Whether you look at war, poverty, power struggles, or even sentiment toward a pandemic. It sucks, yes, but technology has transformed the way we confront these challenges, enough to the point where we could possibly say that history only rhymes now. But the true repetition appears to be found within our minds. And it makes sense. I mean, evolution takes a long time to occur. And for as long as human history has existed, our brains have essentially been the same. My hypothesis on this is that we still have the brains of our ancestors, but we now live in a world that isn't compatible with the hardware we inherited. And by hardware, I mean it in the sense that our brain is like a computer that processes data, while our thoughts and experiences are the actual data. An internet-powered world has also drastically increased the amount of data we're exposed to. And the issue may be that we've also inherited mental algorithms that utilize the data like our ancestors did too. My main reason for believing this is that prior to 12,000 years ago, humanity didn't get a lot of exposure to new ideas or experiences very often. In fact, for most of our existence, there was likely minimal culture, collaboration, and sharing of ideas, or at least according to the fossils. We were basically cave people or nomads hunting and gathering to survive for millennia. And I believe it's influenced the algorithms that power our minds today. With so few influences on an individual state of mind for so long, I think it may have helped create a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which is a tendency for some people to believe that they are smarter or more capable than they actually are. With less people to compare oneself to, could you believe that our ancestors may have internalized their perspective as the best one? We often take for granted how minor interactions with other people can spark curiosity or doubt in one's ability. But the point is, no matter where this algorithm came from, it makes it extremely hard to recognize our own incompetence. To make matters more challenging, it's common to view ourselves as the main characters of our own story. So there's a big incentive to perceiving oneself positively. It's something that anyone can fall victim to, including myself, mostly just out of self-preservation. I'm sure we all know that one person that loves boasting about how much smarter they are compared to the quote-unquote authority on the matter. But that's just because Dr. Google has amplified our ability to feel more validated and knowledgeable. Of course, it's increased our potential to become smarter, but more often than not, most of us seek information that further validates our worldview. This pattern has occurred across time and within every culture. But the real problem occurs when these overconfident people come into a position of power.
Trust me, I'm like a smart person.
It's difficult to quantify, but anecdotally, I think leadership like this fosters an environment that's resistant to change and oftentimes runs counter to democratic decision-making. So what can be done to avoid this tendency in our mind? Well, Dunning and Kruger suggests that as experience with a subject increases, confidence typically declines to more realistic levels.
This is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier.
Disregarding time, some active steps we can take to avoid this tendency from occurring within ourselves is to question what we know, get second opinions from other people, and develop a desire for constant learning. Applying some mental modesty would be a big help toward adapting to our ever-changing world. But there's another algorithm that's inhibiting our advancement, often referred to as greed. It's a selfish and excessive desire for more of something than is needed, and it's amplified when we have other people to compare ourselves to. The human mind has a knack for never being satisfied, best showcased by the fact that no matter how much land a country conquers or times you get a raise at work, there eventually comes a feeling that compels us to desire more. In the modern world, this usually shows itself as a self-imposed tax on our standard of living, where after earning more money, we purposely increase the quantity and quality of the things we consume, even though the microwave ramen and 20-year-old car supported us just fine. This is best described by something called the Hedonic Treadmill, which hopes to explain how our mind finds new personal baselines of happiness as we experience the ups and downs of life, the status quo, if you will. Just as it's possible for your body to adapt to something like weather or flavor, our minds are constantly faced with new data that causes us to reevaluate what would make us feel more happy, comfortable, and sometimes superior. It's both a blessing and a curse, since it allows us to strive for more out of life, but occasionally comes at the cost of our mental health and the natural environment. In the age of social media and consumption-based economies, this has been linked to a significant increase in depression and anxiety within countries like the US, especially for young people, likely because social media systematically exposes you to the most appealing and sometimes fake sides of people's lives. And if your digital life is obscured by advertisements that constantly remind you that you're not pretty, fulfilled, or rich enough, the mind is bound to reevaluate what it needs. Now, this isn't to say that social media is the enemy or we should all become minimalists, but more so to point out that the external influences rarely increase our happiness for long. And instead, we should focus more on how we think instead of what we're thinking about. Some great ways to get off the treadmill include making time for your loved ones, savoring positive experiences, and reminding yourself that the only reason you get to have these emotional spikes is because you don't have to spend all your time hunting and gathering like your ancestors did. So it's no wonder that we aren't able to handle these emotions very well sometimes. Typically, I'd say issues in society can be worked out by evaluating how our thoughts caused us to come to the conclusions we do. But what happens when you're engaging with someone that refuses to do that? Unfortunately, when individuals or those in power refuse introspection, it occasionally leads to an instinctual response of violence. Prior to the development of complex language skills and governmental monopolization of force, I'd imagine violence was an integral part of life for deciding hierarchies and resolving disputes in human society. So much so that humanity to this day still worships the generals and warriors from battles more than the academics that worked hard behind the scenes to resolve wars diplomatically. It's such an integral part of human culture at this point that most forms of entertainment present moments of violence at the climax to most stories. Even for someone like me, I've never been in a fight. But ironically, I really love anime and it's full of violence. Despite this, it hasn't stopped people from speculating how things like video games and R-rated content incentivize more physical aggression. But research on the matter tells us it's the opposite. The tendency to become violent is an ancient trait in humanity, and there isn't a clear-cut solution for eradicating it. Even extreme punishments like the death sentence have failed to deter murders, and I think it's because we're failing to acknowledge that physical violence requires internal psychological solutions, not revenge-driven ones that are described as justice. For the foreseeable future, there will always be a percentage of people with a chemical imbalance or trauma that will make them violent. But for the majority of people, there are techniques we can use to de-escalate and reduce violent impulses. The easiest being to just zoom out from the situation and take a deep breath. And ask yourself, is your anger coming from someone else? Or is it coming from the way you perceived someone else? But if these tips aren't enough, seeking mental health care is nothing to feel ashamed about. And supporting politicians that wish to alleviate economic inequalities can go a long way too. So I've had my doubts that a video like this would attract many people. But if you've made it to the end, I want you to know the real reasons for why I'm sharing these ideas. It's all too common nowadays for people to expect a technological solution to all the problems on Earth. And although I see a lot of potential in complementing our brains with AI to better understand the world and each other, I still think the secret to creating a more long-lasting and sustainable civilization comes from within us. And not to be cliche, but if the brain is like a machine, we need to look at it like an engineer would, by using first principles. Only after evaluating the foundation for why our cognitive patterns exist can we ever hope to transcend from the ancient minds we've inherited and end the cycle of repetition. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think down in the comment section. And with that, keep orbiting, and I'll see you in the next one.